Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Veterans Voice here on the Mountain Television Network, a show that's all about bringing honor and respect and showing our great appreciation for our local military heroes who have fought so valiantly for our country. I'm Terry Smith, along with my co-host here, Ken Wiley. Ken, great to see you again.
Thank you, Terry. Good to be here.
And I tell you, we have a special guest here today, Keith Buchanan. Keith, great to have you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much for being here with us. And Keith, not only is the organizer, does World War II Symposium that this year, but also looking ahead to the future World War II symposiums. But he's really an expert. I mean, he's spent a lot of years, 7, 8 years, just studying and researching and World War II and interviewing so many of the veterans from across the country, and really probably Ken knows more about it than about anybody in America right now.
Yes, right. You're right.
Yeah.
He has really put his time to it. As he put it the other day, he works for money, but he plays for enjoyment, and his play is researching World War II and veterans.
Yeah, so you actually, Keith, you started out interviewing World War II veterans long before we started here with the show.
I
and
sure
so you've
did.
got a number of years of background with that.
I had a great uncle who was in Burma, and I thought I'm going to interview him just to see what all he went through. And got some information off of him, and I had some clients that found out they were in the war and started interviewing them. And I just started, anywhere I went, if I met someone and they were in the age range that I thought they would have participated in the war, I said, hey, were you in World War II? And they'd say yes or no, and I'd say, can I talk to you? And they said, sure. And I just started interviewing these gentlemen and just got some fantastic stories.
Yeah, so Keith, tell us about it first. Keith grew up in Spruce Pine, went to Harris High School, and lives here in Boone now, and has for a lot of years as a CPA, accountant. And but tell us a little about growing up, first of all, in Spruce Pine.
Growing up in Spruce Pine, let me tell you, it was Mayberry, because I grew up there in the late 60s and early 70s. I promise you, it's just like growing up in Mayberry. It's just like being with Andy and Opie and the whole crew, and there was even an Otis. So it was just like being in Mayberry. It was awesome, and I was real lucky and got to go down to Davidson College and get a degree down there, and came up here to App and got a master's degree in accounting and passed the CPA exam. So it's worked out very well.
Yeah, so you played football down there at Harris, and then you played at Davidson.
I sure did.
Yeah.
I sure did.
Came back up here, and then you've been a CPA, and really have your own offices up here in Boone and also down in Spruce Pine.
I sure do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I do that to make a living. This is the stuff I do. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I have a good time.
Yeah. So tell us about then. So after you were up here, you got your master's degree at Appalachian.
I did.
And then you actually also have taught for a number of years off and on at Appalachian.
I graduated and passed the CPA exam, and I ended up teaching for several years at App and enjoyed it. And after that, I moved over to Nashville, Tennessee, started my own practice over there. I owned a chain of NASCAR stores. I did some racing over there and had a great time. And I've also taught seminars to CPAs and lots of other groups, so financial type seminars.
Yeah, so then you came back here, and about 7, 8 years ago, you started doing research and interviews and talking to a lot of World War II veterans.
I did. It was just, as I said, it started out with my great uncle, and I just do more and more, and got to work with Ken. Did some stuff through the honor flights and met Ken. They said, why don't you come over to our meetings? And they invited me with open arms, and I've just enjoyed every one of them.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how successful you organized the World War II Symposium that we had this year, and it was fantastic there.
Well, first of all, it wasn't just me.
Yeah.
Ken did a whole lot of stuff, and Matt Bagley, he and I worked together a lot. Matt works over at Wells Fargo, and we were in a meeting in December of last year, of 11, and Ken said, how can we get some more recognition of our group? And I'd been to a symposium at Liberty University just on D-Day, and I mentioned that. He said, let's do it. That's pretty much how it started. It went from there. It just started rolling. It snowballed. And the biggest problem we had was just getting a place to have it. And then we got the speakers, and from then it's just planning all the minutiae and getting everything put together.
Yeah.
We had a great time. I mean, we worked our tail off, but we had a great time.
Yeah, it was tremendous, wasn't it, Ken?
It certainly was.
Yeah. So you're planning some more for the future, like?
Well, we're already in talks of doing one this summer. The one we did this past August was for 3 days, and we're going to condense it a little bit and do it just for 1 day because, as Ken said, some of our veterans got a little tired after 3 days, and I can tell you we did too.
Yeah.
But we're probably going to do it 1 day and 1 evening. We have not decided yet. Sometime this summer, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Keith is going to tell some stories, and really some of the people that he's interviewed, and some fantastic World War II stories. And so tell us a little bit about just before we start the summary of what the story is going to be about.
This story, I've sent it into World War II History magazine, and I call it The Last Flight of Nelson King and the Nelson King. So there's a gentleman named Nelson King, and there's an airplane named Nelson King. And in this story, there are two completely different stories, two different flights that this B-17 crew made. But the way it started was kind of neat, and it's one of those things you just fall into, and that's why I interview veterans, because you never know what you're going to find. I had been to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I was actually with a friend over there doing research on General Patton. And I came back, and I had a few days of Wall Street Journal's backlog, and I always read my journals. And I go through there, and I read this article about children of veterans looking for information on their parents. So it turns out one of the children was in Bakersville, North Carolina, which is in Mitchell County as well as Spruce Pine. So I pick up the phone and call him. He says, yeah, come on down, and I'll show you what I've got on my dad. His dad was a co-pilot on a B-17. He had 5 loose-leaf notebooks full of letters his dad had sent to his parents and articles on his dad. And that's where I got a lot of the information, was on the articles. Well, I thought, I believe there's a story here. So I got on the internet and looking. I contacted the 100th Bomber Group and the 8th Air Force Group out of California. And I found one surviving crew member of this airplane. And he was in a rest home over in Tennessee. And the best way I can describe it's a tiny little town. I got on I-40 and went to Cookeville, turned north to the Kentucky border, and I was almost in Kentucky. And it was 5 hours over and a long 5 hours back. But he said, I talked to him on the phone. He was just energetic. He says, if you come over here, I will tell you some stories. And he did. And I went over there and got some great stories, and that's how I put all this together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about how this is a really important part of the history?
Well, it is, because we have covered many aspects of World War II. One of the areas that we haven't really covered in that much detail was the 8th Air Force and the great job that they did in really putting down the German production during World War II. So many stories are out there, and Keith he's gotten right to the root of this. He's going to tell us about a crew that flew on these B-17s in the 8th Air Force. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So go ahead and get us started here, Keith.
Well,
That'd be great.
first of all, let's tell you a little bit about the 8th Air Force. Most people don't know this, but they had more casualties than the entire United States Marine Corps in World War II, between 25 and 30,000 men. And if you've ever been near a B-17, or if they had one in Hickory in October that you could go actually walk through. Actually, it'd take you on a flight if you wanted. But the skin of a B-17 is paper thin. And they throw up these 88 shells that explode in the air, and there's shards of metal, steel, iron, whatever, and it just rips right through them, and they rip right through flesh as well. So you had this going for you. I think I read the chances of an airman surviving at the start of the war. They had to make 25 flights, and then they had no more. They were still in the service, but no more bombing flights, and that kept on going up as we lost more and more men. But the chances of them making the 25 flights were less than 1 in 4.
Yeah. Yep. And Ken, you had some family in your
I
brothers.
had 2 brothers. One brother was a co-pilot on a B-17. He was lost. The other made his missions. He was a top turret gunner, and he made his missions. But a little later, he was in 1944. My earlier brother had been 1943 and early 1944. But I think that the average life they considered was 15 flights.
Mm-hmm.
The average guy made 15 flights, and they were supposed to make 25 or more.
Until they got shot down. So tell us about your brother. Actually wrote back to your father, didn't he, shortly before?
My brother wrote a letter back to my father, and he got it the day before they got the message that Joe had been killed. And I think I told you this story, but I was in the Pacific the night before we went into Quadrant, and we were having an air raid. And it was January the 30th, 1944, and I knew, all of a sudden, I just knew God spoke to me, really. And my brother Joe had been killed.
Yeah.
Now, Mayo wasn't too good about catching up with people out on front lines then. And from January the 30th, 1944 until April, we had gone through Kwajalein and Wetak back into Pearl Harbor before I got the mail that confirmed what I knew was already true.
And it was interesting, too, what your brother said to your father about how dangerous it was.
He, and I don't know how it got by the censors, perhaps because he was an officer in some way this letter got through, but he told my dad that every mission that they went out on, they would have people get killed and some of the airplanes would be shot down. He had had to actually change airplanes 2 or 3 times by his 5th mission. And he said, Dad, I know that I won't be coming back. I mean, it was that bad. These, you go out with 10 men in that flight, you come home with 3 or 4 of them shot up real bad, some of them dead. Sometimes the whole crew. In many cases, and Keith may mention this in his story, but there was one time that they lost 60 B-17s on one mission. They call it Black Thursday or something. And that means that 600 airmen had been killed on that day, killed or captured on that day.
And you've talked about it before, but Keith, I'm sure you talk about it. In the early years, you know, prior, you know, it got better. You know, there was more protection of the B-17s later, but early on in this period of time, there wasn't.
There was better protection for 2 reasons. One, the P-51s and the P-47s had gas tanks that they would drop off, but it gave them the extra 500 miles that they could follow the B-17s over to their targets. And the other thing, the newer B-17s also had more machine guns coming out of the nose of the gun, because that is where the Luftwaffe would attack the B-17s is head on. That was the place where there was the least firepower coming from. And now the other, and you think about this, we were sending the bombers over to bomb the industries over there. But the other thing they were doing, and we were I guess we were smart, but we were using the B-17s as bait to lure up the German airplanes, and we would shoot them down, hopefully. And it was a heavy price to pay, but they did this to make sure that the Luftwaffe did not interfere with us on D-Day, and pretty much we had no problem with the German Air Force on D-Day. Yeah. So it was kind of a twofold deal to reduce the German military industry and also to get rid of the Luftwaffe.
So Nelson King and his crew, where would they fly out of? It would be.
There was a little town called Thorpe Abbotts, England. It was 90 miles north of London. And this little, when I say town, it wasn't even a town really, but in this county over there, it says at that time during World War II, 1 of every 7 people was an American. And they'd pretty much taken over this area. And it was this way all over England. And on this flight, one of the flights we're going to talk about in the latter part of this story, there were 1,500 planes. Now, that's not all bombers. It's about 950 bombers, and the rest of them were P-47s and P-51s. The bombers were B-17s and B-24s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does it start out? I mean, originally with Nelson,
Well, here's the beginning of the story, and this is, we're going to talk about Nelson in this one. And I got this information from the newspaper articles and also from Murray Schreier, who I interviewed. He was in the rest home in Tennessee. They were going up, this was on November 29 of 43. And they'd made a run to Germany. They were in Bremen, Germany, and they said they had no problems, and they were coming back, and they were at 35,000 feet. They said on a normal day at 35,000, the temperature was a negative 50 degrees. Now, you got to remember, these airplanes are not pressurized, they're open. I mean, there were huge windows that are open. They're wearing electric suits to keep warm. They're plugged in and to keep warm and everything. But they're at 35,000 feet, and they have to wear oxygen mask. Okay. He said on this particular day, he said, we'd never had a problem before. He says normally it's about 50 below. On this particular day, he said it was closer to 60 below. He said, I was 17 or 18. I didn't know what the implications of that meant, but he said it was about 60 below. And then doing some research, I found that was true. It was about 60 below. Now, that extra 10 degrees causes problems. Now, Murray Schreier was a ball turret gunner. He's on the bottom of the airplane. And when I talked to him, I said, you're kind of tall to be in, and the turrets are very small. He was 5'9". He said, I could not even wear my boots in there. He took his boots off. He said, I wore 3 pairs of socks to keep warm. Also, he could not wear a parachute. He could not wear a parachute. So he was in there, and there are oxygen lines running through the airplane they do not run into the turret because the turret goes around in circles. He had an oxygen bottle. In an oxygen bottle, when you have oxygen bottle, you know there's moisture in there. In fact, I was doing some reading the other day in NASCAR, because oxygen has moisture in it, they run nitrogen in their tires. So they were having these oxygen bottles, and he said, I'd had it before, and there would be slush in the tube coming up to my mask. He said, I would just mash it up. It was no problem. But he said, I knew something was wrong on this particular day. He said, it was not slush, it was frozen solid. He said, I could not breathe. He said, I radioed up to the pilot. The pilot was a guy named Frank Lauro. He was from New York. At that time, when he joined the Air Force, he was the youngest member of the New York Stock Exchange. And I thought, that's pretty impressive. You get a guy that smart, obviously. So he radioed up to the pilot, and he said, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get some oxygen. So he said, okay. So Murray said, I climbed out of the turret, and I got up to the door of the radio operator, who was Nelson King. I got up to his door. He said, that's all I remember. Well, Nelson King came out and he saw immediately what was happening. So he gets down and he's hooking up his face mask to the oxygen line, but there's a problem. Murray had on a newer helmet with a newer type face mask, and the one he's trying to hook up to the airplane's oxygen line is an older one. And he could not get it to fit and snap on. So what he's going to do is just tie it around behind his helmet. And the helmet's kind of like one of the old leather football helmets you see in some of the old movies. So he said, I'm going to just tie it, he's going to tie it onto his helmet. Problem was, if you've ever had ski gloves on, you ever tried to tie a knot with ski gloves, you can't do it. He pulls his gloves off. Oh, I forgot to tell you one thing. He had already unhooked from the plane's oxygen lines, and he put on an oxygen bottle because he had to walk back to where Murray was. Also, one of the waist gunners had put on an oxygen bottle, and he came up to help. All the oxygen bottles were frozen. So the waist gunner, he passes out. The other waist gunner comes up to help him, and he's on the verge of passing out. So Nelson King has got the mask tied around Murray. When he passes out, he just falls over on him. Now, the airplane has 4 crewmen who are passed out. And Murray said, if the Germans had known this, they'd have been all over us like everything. Said, we only had a top turret gunner and a tail gunner, really, with machine guns. So anyway, the captain, he knows something bad's going on, something horrible's going on. So he sends the co-pilot, who is a guy named Joe Griesemar, who's the gentleman, his son I'd met. Yeah. Joe was a farm boy from Ohio who had been a sprint car racer. And he's kind of he was a, daredevil type guy. And he was doing a good job as a co-pilot. So he comes back and he sees what's going on. So Murray Schreier is starting to come to. He's got the oxygen mask on. So he helps Schreier get back up into his seat, into the co-pilot's seat, and he plugs him in to the electric. He plugs his uniform into the electric heater and everything. And Murray said, I was sitting there. He said, I was shivering so badly. He said, I couldn't talk. So the pilot's asking me questions. He said, I could not talk. He said, the other problem I had was I couldn't see. And he said, I talked to the doctors when I got on the ground, and he said, I couldn't see, but he says, after a while, my sight came back. The doctors told him what had happened was the moisture in his eyes was freezing, that if he had been out much longer, he would have lost his eyesight. Now, Joe Griesemar, the co-pilot, goes back to help the gentleman, and the tail gunner comes back, and they help the two waist gunners, and he's working with Nelson King. Now, he gets the oxygen mask on Nelson King, and he gets him some oxygen. But remember, he has been down there for 20 minutes with no gloves on. He does not have frostbite. When he passed out, the blood constricted, the blood vessels and everything constricted, so the blood's going back in the main part of the body. There's nothing going on in his extremities. He doesn't have frostbite. His hands are frozen. So when he came to, they said his hands had swollen to the size of grapefruits. And he was just flailing against the sides of the airplane, and chunks of his flesh, frozen, were coming off. And he said there was no blood coming out. He said until they got below 5,000 feet, no blood came out of his hands. And what they did was they gave him morphine, whatever they had up there, to kind of get him out. So they got down, they landed and got on the ground, and what I read where Lieutenant Lauro, the pilot, said, he said, when I looked at the flight surgeon, when they got him, he said he looked at his hands and said he could see from the look in the flight surgeon's eyes that this was really bad. So what they ended up doing was, Nelson King lost all of his fingers and thumb on both hands and part of each hand. But what they ended up doing was they slit his hand right here. And so it's kind of like a claw. And he was able to drive and write. But that was the end of his flying career. And Murray said he went out to see Nelson King, I think in about 47. And he was a farmer out in Nebraska. And he ended up being a minister in a farm, and said he saved Murray's life. And he got the Silver Star for it. And in fact, we've got some photos. I don't know if they will pull them up, but there's a photo of him in Life magazine, and all you see is sitting there, and there's just two stumps basically, all taped up. And I found it actually got out of a Life magazine up at Appalachian's Library, and he saved his life. So in gratitude, they named their airplane the Nelson King. Yeah, and that's the first part of the story. But I read that, I thought, my gosh, this is fascinating. No one was hurt, but this is just something not caused by the Germans, but just by circumstances, and you never know what's going to happen.
That's unbelievable. Ken, we wouldn't think about it. That's a risk that you would never, an average person, a viewer, wouldn't really even think about how cold it was on the planes like that. Yeah. I mean,
the thing when he told us these stories, I remembered a story that my brother, who was a top turret gunner, had told me about several times that the people in the ball turret and the waist gunners would have lose their oxygen, and one guy just had taken his mask off and had passed out. And each member has to check in pretty often with each other, and they crawl around and put the mask back on the guys.
Yeah. But you had all the things you
know. All kinds of dangers up there.
All kind of dangers. Yeah, you got the Germans. You've got the fact of flying just in general. You're getting shot at from everyone, and then on top of that, you're in a very dangerous environment. Just as an environment.
The temperature, the lack of oxygen. It's put it all together. It's dangerous. Yeah. They didn't make enough money.
And so it was interesting that Joe Griesemar, you mentioned there, his son was the one in Bakersfield that you interviewed him.
I did.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of digress just a bit. He told me a story, and his dad told him this, and no way to verify anything, but his dad said to tell you how dangerous it was, especially for ball turret gunners. They had no parachute. They're in this plexiglass bubble. He said they were flying. They were in an air battle. And he said a plane, his dad didn't, this is the story Dad said, he didn't know which plane it was or anything, but a plane in front of them. Apparently the ball turret got hit, it shattered the plexiglass, and the gunner, the airman inside there, he said he came flying back towards their airplane. And he said his dad said that he looked at him eye to eye. He said just had that split second, and they caught each other's eyes. The guy had no parachute, and you knew what was going to happen. He said that's just some of the stuff that can happen.
Oh, yeah. And that was because it was a very tight area, wasn't it? So there wasn't room. He couldn't wear a parachute.
Could not wear a parachute, no. No. I mean, if you look at them, if you ever get a chance to see one, they are. I mean, none of us in here would ever have to worry about doing that. Yeah. We're too tall.
So after Nelson King then couldn't continue to fly, and so they named a plane after him. But did the rest of the crew stay together?
The crew stayed together. Of course, they had a replacement for Nelson himself, but the crew stayed together. And then the next part of the story, now we were in November when this happened, and they went through, they had air battles, but again, they were very, very lucky. Whatever happened, they had all their lucky charms with them. And whatever happened, they were continuing on until March the 6th. March the 6th is 3 months exactly before D-Day. And Murray said they got up that morning, they had like a 2:30 wake-up call. And I asked him, I said, well, is this something you knew in advance? He said, no, we never knew what mornings that they'd come in and knock on the door and say, you got to go. He said they would call us, wake us up at 2:30. We'd put our clothes on, we'd get something to eat, we'd go have meetings that would tell us where we're going that day. And he said that day, they had a map, they had a huge map up. And he said you could just hear everybody going, the size and everything was like, oh God, well, this is going to be bad. And he said there was this huge long tape going from their air base. It was Berlin. The first time, I think the Black Thursday you were talking about, it was March the 6th of 44. they were sending everything to Berlin. There places they were looking for. One was the Bosch plant. Bosch, well-known maker of spark plugs now, and the other was the Mercedes, the Daimler-Benz plant, where they're making engines for the airplanes and tanks. So they were going after that. They were sending the entire 8th Air Force. As I mentioned a while ago, there were over 1,500 planes, ballpark about 550 of the P-47s and the P-51s, and the rest were the bombers. Now, not 950 bombers made it that day because, to show you how dangerous this is, a B-24 crashed on takeoff. And they said it was a foggy, misty day, and it just could not gain altitude, and it crashed at the end of the runway. All of the other planes had to fly over that plane as they were taking off. I mean, you know, it's there on the ground, it's burning, it exploded, it had full of fuel, full of bombs, full of ammunition. They're flying right over it. They see their friends where they all died. Then they had another group of 40 planes that somehow they got the coordinates didn't get right, because when you're talking about 1,500 planes, this is not from one air base. This is all over the entire island, if you will, of England and Scotland. They're from all over the place, and they're coming up. So they did lose about 40 B-17s. It just got lost. And then there were some other things. They said one of the B-17s, they always do a machine gun check out over the English Channel. And so the plane above them did a machine gun check, and a box of machine gun cartridges fell through the plexiglass from a plane above, and it had to turn around and go home. So it's just, you know, odd things that happen. And anyway, they're on their way to Germany. Now, you got 950 bombers, ballpark, and you've got about 550 fighters protecting them. This train, if you will, was 96 miles long. 96 miles, because they keep a decent distance between them. The Nelson King, as I'll refer to it now, was in what was called the 13th Air Wing. There are usually about 21 bombers in a wing, and they were directly in the middle of this train, if you will. The 1st Bomb Division was in front of them, the 2nd Bomb Division was behind them. They're in the 3rd Bomb Division. Well, they're getting across to the coast of France, and they're headed to Berlin. The 1st Bomb Division, for some reason, starts veering south. And they don't know it because they have to keep radio silence, and they thought they'd just lost some space between them. Now, when it turns out, when they're veering south, the Nelson King is the lead plane in the lead wing in the rest of this train. And each plane has its own navigator. I actually interviewed a navigator not long ago, and I said, if there was a one main navigator, did you have to do stuff too? He goes, oh yeah, if we got lost, we had to know where we were. So they were the lead plane. The Nelson King was the lead plane in this second group where the first group had veered down. Now, I'll tell you a couple of things. Joe Griesemar, who was the co-pilot, they put him at tail gunner that day because he had never trained with a machine gun. They put him at tail gunner. They brought in another guy, Captain Jack Swartout. And Captain Jack was one of these characters you read about back during the war. It's kind of like, I don't remember the comic strip, Ken, you may, Terry and the Pirates. Yeah. He was a character kind of like that. And he flew fighters, he flew bombers, but they said they wanted him, and he was in the lead plane. He was in the lead bomber. They wanted him there to help because he had a lot of expertise and he could do anything. So he's actually flying in the right-hand seat today, and this comes out to be really helpful to them later on. So now they're actually the lead plane and the rest of the whole group. The Luftwaffe sees this. The Luftwaffe sees, and they're separating. I think I read where they're separating. The separation's growing at a mile a minute. So it's separating pretty fast. They're still headed to Berlin. The rest of the planes, and they actually get back in line later, but it's too late. The Luftwaffe sees this because they've got radar as well. So they send up what's called a grouping of airplanes. Basically, a group. It's the German word for group. And they send up 3 groupings to attack the front of this freight train. They've got Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Well, what they do, they said they borrowed their strategy from the U-boats, the Wolf Pack. And instead of having the planes attack the whole thing, they would attack a few of them. They come up, and they would, at that time, they only had, I think they said they had 8 P-47s to protect them. So the Germans attacking the P-47s, and they said it was just row after row of German planes coming at them. And they said when they came at a B-17, if you read their strategy, they wouldn't come from above. There's 2 Top Guns shooting them, and they came straight on because there's right in there for a little ways and straight on, there was really nothing hitting them. And they had half a second because they're coming in at basically 450 miles an hour. The B-17 is going 175. They have a half a second they can shoot at the B-17. They know if they get several slugs in here in the pilot's compartment, the plane's gone. They know if they get 1 cannon shot in there, the plane's gone. So they come in here and they got half, so they all hit just head on. There were 21 planes in this wing. After the first fly through, 6 of them were on fire. 11 of them did not make it back at all. One of the 11, 1 went to Sweden, and the other 10 went down. So they're getting hit. They're getting everything. Well, they come on, and then one's coming at all these have come through, and they said this one lone Messerschmitt is coming at the Nelson King, and it comes to him, and it goes up just as late as possible. It goes up, but what it does is it hits the tail fin. It hits the tail fin of the Nelson King, and I have photos of it. Joe Griesenbar was the tail gunner. He said it knocked him out. He said he woke up and he's looking up in the sky. He says, "My God, I'm falling." But he realized he wasn't falling. It knocked what was above him. It knocked him off. Now, the entire fin wasn't gone, but a huge chunk of it is gone. And he said he had been shooting the machine gun so hard, didn't know how to do it. He said, I was just shooting at anything that moved. He said the machine gun was so hot, a bullet would go in it and the heat would cause it to go off and it would continue to shoot even though he'd let go of the gun. But he had knocked off the top part of the tail fin and there's a huge chunk out of the fuselage gone. Still no injuries. Well, the plane now obviously is not going to fly right, but a B-17 could fly forever if it just had a little help. So they immediately drop out of the formation. Now this is bad news because the Germans are looking for that one long plane. He drops the bombs. Lieutenant Lauro said, we're going to drop the bombs. So they dropped the bombs. Now, Murray was telling the story. He said the Germans saw them and said they just started encircling the plane. He said it was kind of like the cowboys and the Indians when the Indians would run around the wagon trains. And he said they were just going around us and they were just shooting us and shooting us and shooting us. And he said somehow we're just shooting as hard as we can. But one of the planes has a cannon, and it shoots into the front side of the pilot's compartment. It does not explode, thank goodness. But it goes in there, it rips through the hydraulics, and it hits Swartout, Captain Swartout, who's sitting in the right-hand seat. It hits him in the chest, the back end of the cannon bullet, whatever you want to call it. And it knocks the breath out of him. You ever had the breath knocked out of you, know what it feels like. And he was covered in red hydraulic fluid, hot red hydraulic fluid, and he thought it was blood. He yells, I'm hit. And the top gunner comes down, and he's trying to bandage him. He says, no, I'm not hit, leave me alone. But the thing was, when it knocked out the hydraulic fluid, obviously now we're going to have some problems. We've also got this air rush coming in. The pilot and co-pilot can't hear each other. They just throw their headphones off. So now we're down here and we're shot all to pieces. 2 engines are out. One of the gas tanks has a hole in it. The engine was streaming oil behind it, and it covered up the ball turret. You can't see how to shoot anything, so the bottom ball turret's worthless. And I didn't tell all this the other day because there's a lot of stuff. Now, they're saying, what do we do? So Swartout says, let me take over. So Swartout basically takes over, but the plane is so hard to fly and so physically demanding, they can only fly 140 miles an hour. If they get up faster than that with the tail fin messed up, it's vibrating so much. So anyway, they drop down in altitude, and Swartout is doing the flying, but it's so demanding they take turns. They're going back and forth, and they're flying with their group. They said, we know we don't want to fly through Berlin. Basically, they're going to bypass it. And they're flying at such a low level, they said the flak is coming up, but several times the flak came up, the shells went through the wings and went on up above and exploded.
They exploded at altitude.
They exploded at altitude. They don't explode upon hitting something. So they bypass Berlin and make it, and there's the 390th bomb group is over there, and I forgot to mention they're in the 100th bomb group, the bloody 100th. The 390th bomb group's over there, and so they fly under it, and they thought it was Germans, because the Germans sometimes would get a captured B-17 and fly it up and attack our guys. So they didn't know what to do. So anyway, they had no radio also, so they couldn't contact them, and there was no radio contact anyway. So anyway, the plane comes up, and he said the Germans would start attacking. He said, I would ease up on one side of the bomb group, and then if they come up on the other side, this is where Swartout came in really good, because he was a fighter pilot also, and he would go up on the other side. He was basically just dodging the Germans anyway. He did not keep formation. He was just trying to dodge the Germans. And he said, fortunately, a damaged P-38 came up with them, and he tailed in behind him. He said he knew that as long as that P-38 was there, even though it was damaged, the other guys would know they weren't Germans. And there was getting ready to be another attack of the Luftwaffe, and said a whole squadron of P-47s came in. He said, and we made it home. He said they came to where they were going to land at the airbase. They said, They sent them to another landing field, which is basically a junkyard. This plane was shot all to pieces. He said you could see the sky as you walked around through it. It was amazing. Not one. They had a couple of minor injuries. No one was hurt. Yeah. This was in March of '44. They made their 26th mission in April of '44. They had to go one extra mission. Now, because they had made 26 missions and they survived, they were members of something called the Lucky Bastard Club. Yeah. Murray Schreier was a ball turret gunner who had an even shorter lifespan. They said, well, since you've completed your 26 missions, we're going to send you to Italy, and you're going to be a ball turret gunner down there. And he said it was much easier down there, if there is such a thing, and he made 26 more missions. He was a double dirty bastard, double lucky bastard. But all the men made it through. The only injury was really to Nelson King and his hands. The Nelson King was turned over to another crew, and it was shot down. And this just shows how luck is with you sometimes. It was shot down in May of '44. There were 7 men killed and 3 POWs out of that crew. So that's the story of the Nelson King, the last flight of the Nelson King.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, to have all that, I mean,
Yeah.
so much damage to it, and to be a sitting duck, really, with all these German planes flying around them.
Yeah, but when I got all this story together, I thought, this is an awesome story. And just those guys, the stuff they went through, and the whole 8th Air Force, when you read about it, I thought, how could you, when you were hearing that knock on your door at 2:30 in the morning, you're going, oh God, is this it? And you just don't know. Yeah. So it's amazing.
The courage that all those guys had to have.
It is.
Unbelievable.
The courage is unbelievable. Yeah. So that's my story.
That's a great story.
Yeah. And Ken, I tell you, you had firsthand knowledge with your brothers, but that the courage and just bravery of these men to get up and to at any moment in time they could be called on a mission, and they didn't know if that was going to be their last one. I mean, percentage-wise,
my brother reminded me of this, and the way they felt coming back, taking off at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can't see anything anyway. And by the time they got to altitude, they had to worry about the fighters and then the anti-aircraft all the way in. And coming back, they said if they got to the point where they could see the white cliffs of Dover, they felt they were safe again. Come down.
Yeah.
It was 8 hours of, I would say, pure hell.
Yes, it had to be. It had to be.
Can you tell us about how the mission in general, the whole mission itself, how did it go?
We lost 69 B-17s on that day. That's 690 men. I mean, 690 men right there. But it was, as far as being successful, we did drop the bombs on Berlin and get that done. And I've read where Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, said when he saw American bombers over Berlin, he knew that was it. Yeah, he knew that. So as far as that goes, it was successful. We downed a lot of German fighter planes. And when you combine everything, you say, is it worth the loss of 690 lives? Well, that's what they had to decide. Yeah. So if you take that factor out of the equation, it's obviously very successful.
So looking at an overall scheme of the war, obviously the fighting had been throughout Europe, and now they were trying to get in behind there to destroy the manufacturing capabilities.
We were not on the ground yet in France, so this was all lead up to it. It's all part of the big plan. So
And then D-Day came 3 months later.
D-Day was 3 months later, and they used the B-17s for some support in Normandy. In fact, in a much different story, we were trying to get out of the hedgerows in Normandy, and we had B-17s come over and do what they call carpet bombing, and they were just going to bomb like miles and miles and miles, and we did that some in Vietnam. I know a general got killed, an American general, and a lot of Americans got killed where they made some mistakes and bombed too close. And the Americans had backed up from the lines, but we ended up bombing a lot of Americans. We did it once, and Bradley was just really PO'd, but they wanted to do it again. And son of a gun, if they didn't do it again. Yeah.
Fantastic story, huh, Ken? Thank you so much, Keith.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
for coming in here with us and
It's fun.
talking. We'd love to have you come in, more and tell us some other stories. And everything.
I'll see what I can do.
But it's a tremendous honor, isn't it? I mean, since we started this show, I've had so much pleasure at it, and you get so much pleasure meeting these men. And we talk about, they're known as America's greatest generation,
yes,
and they really are.
They are.
Yeah.
And the men, when you talk to them, folks, if you're watching this, if you know a veteran, and they say go up and thank a veteran, which you do, but you can ask them some stuff and never press them, and you never ask blood and guts stories, but let them, they'll tell you some stories, and there are always some great stories. And I always tell people, they ask me about the veterans, and these were tough men. Here's one of them.
Yeah.
And I said, but there's a gentleness to them now, kind of a sweetness, if you want. You hate to say that about a guy that was a big, rugged Marine or a soldier or whatever it was, but there's just something about these gentlemen. It's just so much fun, and they really appreciate it. I really think so.
Yeah, and the thing is they're so humble, and they're also so
they are
community-based. So many, they care. It's all for one and one for all. And that's what society has lost over the time. People have become much more individualistic, much more selfish, self-centered. But the men from this time period are just fantastic. They would do anything for anyone, and that's why to go out into the to fight for their country, there was no question. They were proud to do that.
That's right. There was, no one went to Canada. No one faked an illness, or no one came up with some congressman's son said, everyone went to war. And in fact, I've read in some towns where they might have 2 or 3 soldiers who weren't accepted into the service that could not get in, committed suicide.
There's just so much tremendous pride in representing their country.
Yeah. That was really it was a big thing with the young guys, all the young guys in my town, and it was a small place, so I knew everybody. There was no one that didn't want to get into the service. I mean, it would be, to us, it would have been more of a dishonor to go and do something like going to Canada or like that. So everybody was just waiting to get into it, and that's something that went on for the time of 1940 or 1941 all the way through the war. The guys were just wanting to get in and be a part of it.
As an example, your brother had difficulty joining, and he tried to join and join.
Yeah, he had tried Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Corps, and he got turned down on every one because they said he had a heart murmur. Then he got drafted. The draft board took him. He went into the Air Corps. He was the one that flew the 35 missions and returned. He's alive today.
Yeah. Keith is so important. I mean, you and I are old enough that we can feel close enough to this generation that we have lived. We've grown up with them. So they may have been our fathers, they may have been our grandfathers, but as we've gone up, so we've always lived around this group of men, and so they've rubbed off on us.
Yes.
What worries me somewhat is that the youngsters nowadays, the young children that come up that are generations behind us, they haven't had the opportunity. So it's so important. I think what you're doing, interviewing them and keeping them alive, these stories and that we do here on the Veterans Voice is so important because it allows the tremendous character of these men to get across to our young people.
It does, and the character is a key word. They're all men of character. And I tell a lot of people, I said, when you meet these gentlemen, talk to them, ask them some questions, and they may not tell you a lot, but they may tell you something, and just kind of, I think that makes them feel good that you're interested enough to ask them about their service, and just ask them some stories. And I've said this several times to people. I said, when you talk to these gentlemen, there's something about them. There's a gentleness, if you will, and a sweetness, if you will. And that's something that you don't put together with a rough, tough soldier, paratrooper, Marine, seaman, whatever. But there is something about this, and they have lived through all this, and they're still here, and they're just seem like they're really just glad to share this with you. And again, you never ask for blood and guts stories. You just tell us some stories about what you did during the war, and you'll hear some good things.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the symposium that you all organized was fantastic. And I think, you know, it was so successful. And you and I have talked about it was because the pride that those men, when they walked into that room, how much pride they had to be there.
Yeah, and I've told lots of people. They said, "Was the symposium successful?" I said, "Let me tell you what I measured success in. When I saw these gentlemen in their 80s, and they walked in, and for 3 days, they were in their 1920s again, whatever, and there was a sparkle in their eyes again. And when youngsters came up and asked them questions, you could just see that pride, and that they were just picked up a step just a little bit higher. It was just amazing. I thought so. You probably saw it as well, didn't you? Or that was you with a sparkle in your eye.
No, we all had it. We all had it, and I saw it in the others too. That all of a sudden they were alive again and had something to live for, and they were proud of it. And, you know, the whole organization that we have is not only we want to recognize the veterans, but we also want to share that with the community, and this is a way of sharing it. So they were glad to be a part of it.
Well,
And Ken, you and I have had so many of those men that were at the symposium there, the World War II veterans here on the show.
Yeah.
But it was fantastic to get to go the way you had it organized, and people could go up and talk to them at their tables. I went up and talked to lots of them at the tables, and it was just, they were so proud to be there, weren't they? It was a beautiful thing to see, and to go up and speak to them, and really, I'm really looking forward to when you guys have some more, because I really think that the number of people that need to go to that, to see that, it was a phenomenal experience.
All of these veterans have saved those posters that we had made up for them with their name on it and everything. They have those badges we had made up. So they're going to be there at the next symposium.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. And you guys are planning one for this coming next summer, I guess.
This coming summer, we haven't set a date, but it's probably in the summer, and we're looking at several different venues, and we're just kind of putting together some plans right now.
Yeah.
We think this one will be easier anyway.
Yeah.
The second go around.
Once you've done one, your sports background too, as you know, and you did NASCAR and everything. Once you've done one, to do another one becomes easier.
Much easier,
because you know how to go about it. Yeah. But it was fantastic for you. The amount of work that you put in for that was tremendous.
Well, it was worth it, and it was a labor of love. Trust me, it was just fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. And I tell you what, all the interviews that Keith does, so many interviews, and really probably across America, he's done more interviews with World War II veterans than about anyone else, and it's a great pleasure and honor to have him here on the show.
Certainly is.
Yeah. Thanks, Keith.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much for being here.
Thank you.
And we look forward to having you come back and tell us some more stories.
I can do it.
And the beauty of this is that, to have these stories is something that we'll have forever, won't we? I mean, you talk about you've put this story into the World War II magazine there.
That's
correct.
correct.
That's going to be published, but there's just, it's so important for these stories to come out because they're going to last us forever.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And be for generations to come. But thanks, Ken. Thanks so much for all that you do. You do a fantastic job for all these, for the organization, the veterans, and everything around here. And he's a true hero too. We're lucky to have him here on the show.
That's right.
D-Days in the Pacific, the Lucky 13. He's also a historian and author, and World War II veteran. But thanks so much for being here.
I think my publisher is going to be interested in hearing from Keith too.
Oh yeah, I think so for sure. But thanks so much, Keith.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken, and another great show. And we look forward to it. Have Keith back again on a future shows. Tell us some more of these great stories. Look forward to having some more of our World War II veterans and our veterans from Korean Wars and Vietnam Wars and anyone, Afghanistan, Iraq. If you know anyone that could be a guest on our show here, please give Ken or myself a call. We'd love to have them on. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you here next week on The Veterans Voice.